Hello there, welcome and thank you for joining us on another edition of the Evening Review. My name is Ogito Greg, and in studio with me this evening I have the inimitable Mr. Patrick Sam. He is a national expert on the creative industries and he will give us an overview on the just ended Namibia Film Week. Welcome Patrick, how are you?
Good evening Ogito and to your viewers.
Thank you very much. The Namibia Film Week this year screened almost 160 films, mostly from Africa, and lots of them, I think close to 60 of them were from Namibia. How was the experience?
Well, I think the experience of being able to, go to a 4-day curated event that was just beyond, the one thing, like you're saying, 159 films out of 650 that were submitted. Just to give some context. Also at the same time, these are features, documentaries, shorts, animations, web series, some student films also featured. Screenings were starting at 10 in the morning, almost like 10 in the evening. And beyond that, there were also workshops, and panel discussions and master classes that were being hosted. So I think the experience was enabling towards the ecosystem, the value chain that's required, because a lot of the times, it's like we can supply the films, but who's watching them?
Yes.
Because where's the demand coming from? Yes. How do you develop audiences to find interest in not just Namibian films, but African films? Because if we don't put our money where our films are,
yes,
then there's no returns on investment, right? So
Indeed.
There's no opportunities for people who have aspirations to be actors, to work in crew, because people are not watching. So yes, as much as we try making, we have to do like the economics of filmmaking.
So was it a conscious decision to stage it at NUST and to make it entrance free in order to build that audience?
Well actually, I can't speak on behalf of the Namibian Film Commission, but I can speak on behalf of NUST.
Yeah.
Because I also am a part-time lecturer within the department there, the digital art and animation. And I think, representing just what the vision is of professional development and what NUST has to offer, particularly with the start of the digital art and animation department that offers, for instance, 2D, 3D animation courses. They're looking at script writing for film and children's television. And so the opportunity for, the coming together was very intentional. Also because the NFC and NUST have signed an MOU that also then, in the previous year had sponsored students to attend these courses at NUST. So I think it's the growing relationship that's showing a very strategic objective that the university is able to invest in the equipment, in infrastructure that can also then give access to the filmmakers in the sector.
Excellent. And let's talk a little bit about the quality of what was on offer, especially how the Namibian productions compared to the productions from Africa. Are we on par? Are there any places where we are ahead of the curve, or are we still trying to catch up?
I think there's one thing you speak about, like specific movies. Like for instance, if you're looking at even in terms of the awards, the two big films that we nominated for from the film side, Speel Aan, which is essentially an Afrikaans film, where they also like sneaking Kweke Kobab. And then you see the level of acting, but also the level of production work and storytelling. I think it does that. Also hashtag, Namibia Land of the Brave. It's similar to what we see throughout the world. I think the challenge that we have when we look at industry is not so much are the quality of the films good enough, how many films are we producing?
Yes.
Right, so it's the volume of films. So if you're looking at a country like Dominican Republic, they make about 76 to 80 films a year.
Okay.
But if you look at the back end of that, it's like 80 films means 80 times people are catered for.
Yes.
80 transport companies, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And in that way, it's the fueling of the economy. So I think it's in a very growing perspective. The quality of the films are there, but we're not producing a lot of them because the cost of producing a film is still very expensive because we don't have an industry. I mean, when we're looking at equipment that must be imported, if we're looking at as simple as some of the trailers that are needed, all of this stuff is brought in and it increases cost. So I think the bigger question is how many films of quality are we producing?
That's a very interesting question. Another interesting or important aspect of filmmaking is that it tells stories, but the question is it telling Namibian stories? Is it really reflecting who we are and who we want to be and where we come from? Or is it just a Hollywood formula that we are regurgitating? Yeah.
Very good. I think what you're talking to us about is like the danger of imitation and rather like the authenticity.
Yes, authenticity.
And I think Namibia in itself being a very diverse country, in its diversity, there's also like hegemony.
Yes.
Right. So like, who's telling whose story? Right. Who's making money from whose story? So that's like an internal conversation that we need to have in terms of like authenticity. All right. Like, are Namibians as resourced to tell their own stories? So I'll give you a practical example. This semester at NAST, we had to cancel the script writing for film and children's television because people are so production focused. But what are you putting into production?
Yeah.
If we are not developing the stories in a very comprehensive manner.
Yes.
So I think our focus must not just look at the output of films like you're talking about, but the genesis. So for instance, in the animation class where I was teaching last year, we're exploring stories like Croc Croc from Katima. And then the writers talking about why the people eat the crocodiles, because you're overfishing.
Yes.
And then naturally becomes like a story about like nature conservation.
Yes.
Right. And I think, taking that into the production line would be interesting. Another one, a student was looking at Together with Tuli, where Tuli is a little girl moving back into the village because her parents are young professionals in the city. And she's a rara and booty kid. And how does she go back early on and, in this calabash meeting this bunny, and they talk about, how to navigate the rural kind of context.
Yes.
And so I think your point is really relevant. And so the investment starts in the originality of the story. And that's how we can then, ensure that the copyright.
Excellent. You also had the opportunity to host some of those discussions, and I'm sure that you listened in on others, and you were attendant at the awards. At the festival in general. Can you tell me about the quality of the discussions that were staged there?
It's if you're looking at particularly let's look at like the master classes or the workshops, like things like from budgeting, like the financial side of it. What it does, it elevates the status of filmmaking. So I always make a joke when I speak to them. You mustn't say you're a filmmaker, man. You must say you're a film manufacturer. Because with manufacturing, there's a whole like trade regime that comes along with this. There's like rebates that are, you can go into like special economic zones and set up film studios in there. So the manufacturing kind of elevation is what we're looking about. And what we talk about in like the world, in the industry, is showbiz.
Yes.
And I think what this film week did is that it focused on showbiz.
Okay.
It looked at marketing and publicity and distribution and issues of how do you, optimize a budget and become cost effective. And I think that's the fuel that these films need.
Okay.
Right? Because these films are the vehicles, but there's not enough fuel in them.
Yes.
It's always in a reserve tank.
So
after you make the production, there's not enough fuel left to get you to Hollywood or to the Oscars or to the Namibian music. To the Namibian Film Awards. So I think strategically what the commission did and for us in the industry, what it capacitated, beyond just us meeting together, because a lot of the times the biggest challenge is fragmentation.
Yes.
You don't even come together. So what I saw, for instance, even in the informal side was, the commissioners from the NBC talking to the ones from One Africa, talking to the ones, who are independent film producers from the production houses. And so I think from there, you could kind of see people forming strategic relationships and bonds. And I think that networking opportunities are very important. And I don't think we should take those for granted.
Yeah, and I definitely think that those are necessary building blocks so that we can produce these captains of film industries that you were alluding to previously. Tell us a little bit about the highlights of the week for you, and maybe also the opportunities that the participants got to dress up and enjoy the glitz and glamour that's supposed to come with film.
Yes, I think for me, like you're saying, it's I got to watch a few of the films. Particularly, I was part of a process where, in the first round, every year the Film Commission uses public investment to commission films.
Yes.
And what was interesting for me was, in the commissioning of the films, I was part of the first round of films that were entered in, and then we kind of took it from the long list to the short list, and then they went through. And a lot of the films that we had given our heads up to, actually ended up being the film. So it was, interesting to watch the short films, particularly that were commissioned by the NFC, and then again understand why public investment is so important in ensuring that each guy got like $150,000, but what came out of it,
yes,
and the level of creativity that is in this country, it's like changing the narrative in terms of talent can be lost, or talent can be developed.
Yes.
And I think when we are intentional about that, when we're developing talent, it becomes a resource.
Yes.
And that resource is what we need to develop as a nation, not just in terms of, when I speak about the creative industries, I always say, unlike other industries where they kill 3 birds with one stone, we save 3 birds with one nest. We save the bird of particularly identity and collective imagination.
Yes.
All right. Well, how do we imagine ourselves as a nation, as creators? How do we feed the soul of the nation? And then how do we also do this in terms of our society? There's a lot of violence in our places. There's a lot of trauma, intergenerational trauma. So how do these films address a lot of these issues that make us have these conversations that are hard to have without the film?
Yes.
And then lastly, it's also about the people's livelihoods. And I think when you consolidate all of that, that's the dignity that we're speaking about, that is encapsulated in this nest. And a lot of the times, I think as Africans, we have an inferiority complex in consuming our own content because it feels like we were made too much fun of for too long. And so how do we, kind of re-own our sense of purpose through film making? And how do we reestablish a sense of dignity by watching these films, by making these films, and then by telling this new narrative?
The Film Week, I think, also gets to demonstrate that Namibian film and film in Africa, it's developing, it's growing, it's getting better. But from a local point of view, a lot of the money-making opportunities, especially short-term, would be perhaps in telling our corporate stories, corporate videos and promotional videos. Although I see that most of our big corporates are always hiring crews from South Africa and further afield. Do you think we are getting to the stage where Namibian production houses can deliver the quality to convince local businesses that they need to hire Namibians to tell those stories?
Okay. Well, I happen to also serve as a public policy guy, right? So generally, in other industries, how you navigate that is that you have like local content quotas, right? So for instance, advertising houses, anybody in the value chain can be through either legislation, regulation, or in terms of policy, be encouraged or mandated to have a local content quota. So it's saying, okay, from every, particularly state-owned enterprises can play a key role in that, to say every state-owned enterprises must use 80% local content when it comes to their marketing, their branding, their PR, and therefore a lot of the times the challenges in the private sector, the brands that we think are Namibian might not be owned by Namibians.
Yes, yes.
And they are part of like a global value chain, all right? And therefore these contracts are centralized and procured not maybe from the Windhoek office, but from the Johannesburg office.
Yes.
And so the question really is, how do we develop relationships with the private sector? What platforms are there? And I know the Namibian government is working on, for instance, the Creative Industry Council, with public, private, and civil society coming together to say, okay, how do we then, enforce issues around local content when it comes to content development?
Thank you very much, Mr. Sam, and thank you very much. We're going to be right back after the short commercial break, so please stay with us. Welcome back to the Evening Review. My name is Ogito Greg, and this evening in studio with me, Mr. Patrick Sam, who is elaborating for us on the just ended Namibia Film Week and all things film. Mr. Sam, you were just telling us about the possibility of using policy to encourage more use of local content and local creative talent. But, the government, for instance, last year there was this big promise of 50 million that was supposed to go into Namibian film And I, for one, I haven't heard anything about where that money went. Perhaps you know better than I do.
So luckily, actually, I was the master ceremony for the opening of Film Week last week, which was also attended by the Minister of ICT. And she did speak about this 50 million.
Oh, yeah. What did she say?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, some of it is being given to the NAMAs, but I think what they're trying to do is find a more sustainable, like, midterm expenditure solution, which is that there will be a creative fund. So there's a lot of things happening on at the creative front. So this 50 million, I think currently in the financial year, has been allocated between the Film Commission and the Ministry, the Directorate of Arts, National Art Council, that side, and then the NAMAs are getting a share of that money. And I think in the long run, what they'll do is have a creative fund, which might be funneled through like what they do with the youth fund, through the development banks.
I was under the impression they're going to use that money to build their film city.
No, that money has not been. The film city is, I think it's a different venture on the side. But like, so for that, that's what's happening. But also what's happening is BIPA is in the process of the copyright levy.
Okay.
And what that means is, the assumption is the creatives aren't making money because technology could be the tool that is used for piracy. So we don't pay for music because we can just get songs downloaded. So there's an idea that there will be a copyright levy that charges 1% on technology that's imported.
Okay.
And currently that nominal account stands at about 8 billion.
Okay.
So in the current framework, if this law is passed, there will be about 18 million plus available annually to creators. And so BIPA is trying to figure out what channel should they use to establish that. And I think this is very important because what we're starting to see is that from a macroeconomic perspective, we're starting to de-risk the sector.
Yeah.
Right? We're seeing it as like how we see mining.
Yeah.
All right? That this opportunity is so huge. And for instance, the Bank of Namibia, you saw last year, they also had a symposium. And so I think that the collective elevation and all of these efforts are going to have a cumulative effect that I think we haven't had before.
I don't know, I'm a bit skeptical, especially
you have to
because
be a little bit skeptical given the past.
Not only that, if we are tying things to laws, you know that in 2024 there were 2 laws passed by our parliament, both related to the budget, without which the government can't proceed. I don't have the figure for 2025, but laws take a long time. I might not be alive by the time those legal changes are made, and that's why there was so much hope at the beginning of last year when it was announced that in 1 year 50 million would be spent on film. And
well, I think if we want to, if in 1 year the intention, the political willingness is there, I think that's a great starting point.
Yeah.
All right. I think the issues around, do we have the capacity to implement $50 million worth of work? Because remember, these institutions are historically aren't used to spending that kind of money.
Yeah.
And during COVID, what we'd seen in other countries, when the budgets increased in other countries in Southern Africa, for instance, in South Africa, 350 million was given extra. There was a lot of accusations of corruption.
Yes.
So a lot of the times, even though there was money given, we have to ensure that there is mechanisms in place that can account for the money. And establishing those mechanisms, like you're saying, beyond the laws, might also take some time because you would need regulations that are in place. So just to give you a little bit of hope, I've been a national expert on 2 projects that are key. Last year, we had given a draft bill to the ministry that has been forwarded to cabinet around the issue of the National Art Fund.
Yes.
Right. And historically, what that looked at was just funding, for instance, art and artworks. But that mandate has been expanded now to look at not just the artworks, but cultural practitioners as well as creative entrepreneurs. And so, for instance, now what that means is when that 50 million is there, there's a mechanism that legislates that, because now with every law and act, there must be regulations that accommodate that.
Yes.
Right. And so I think there's already background work being done. So another thing that the ministry has done is they've got what they call UNESCO Cultural Statistics 2030. And now we'll have a baseline, and there's a collaboration between Survey Warehouse, CIRISC, and NSA and the local cities, where they're gathering data so that, for instance, when the banks are looking at the industry, they know nominal accounts currently it contributes 1.9% of the economy. This is worth about $3.3 billion just in the formal sector, translates into about, do you understand?
Yeah.
So I think what we have done historically problematic in the creative industries is that we've never looked at it from a regulated perspective or from a formal perspective or from a professional perspective. And I think all of these efforts are going to have an unintended effect that I think we are seeing in the private sector. I mean, even yourselves, as NMH, we knew you as a publication house. Now you are streaming.
Yes.
All right. And so you can kind of see a change in the media space.
Yes, yes. There is a lot of growth, and there's a lot of potential for growth. And yeah, I agree that we need to be careful with the steps we take. I mean, if we look at music, for instance, copyright in music hasn't really benefited our musicians materially, even though we've had NASCAM for many years. It's quite established, but it really doesn't put money in the pockets.
Why must a Namibian musician be signed up to NASCAM if you have a challenge with that? That's part of the information sharing, right? Like Bob Marley was signed up to collecting agencies in the UK because he knew that his demand was more there.
Yeah.
So how again are we using informatics, analytics to understand maybe, my music is being played, they were using an example of like Tequila.
Yeah.
Tekla, whose music is more played in like Zimbabwe and is loved there.
Yes.
Maybe she should be signed up to a collecting agency there if we have a challenge with the current system. But I mean, I'm not saying that, NASCAM shouldn't be used, but a lot of what the challenge is, Agito, is that the industry has no appetite for collective bargaining. Right? So if you use construction as an example, if you are a construction worker, even if you're a hanglanger, the people that pay me must give you a certain percentage to your pension.
Yes.
And these are things that were fought for through legislation. And I think part of the ecosystem that I think the opportunity cost or the threat to talent is like, I'm so talented and therefore I must be identified, I must be seen. And not necessarily understanding that good seeds don't grow in bad soil.
Yeah.
All right, so who is responsible for the de-weeding in the soil, for fertilizing the soil, for watering the soil, for trimming the things of the soil? Who's responsible for that?
Yes.
And I think a lot of the times we have false expectations and we're not willing to take up a role and a responsibility towards a collective imagination of what should this country be like in 2050 when it comes to music.
Yes.
Everybody they want to outsource the responsibility, but it needs to be a collective responsibility. So if we're looking at the value chain and the actors, government has a particular role, private stakeholders, promoters have a particular role. The audience as Namibians, what are we spending our money on? Are we willing to, understand that if we go to shows and we pay this, it actually grows us? And the musicians and artists, once we get it, how do we then add value to society? So the entire value chain of the web tends to be contaminated.
Yes.
Right. So where do we then start with cleaning up the mess?
Well, I think we have to inform the people first of all.
Yes.
We have to get everybody on board. But that's difficult, as you've said. I mean, even in terms of...
The ecosystem is difficult. There's no ecosystem, right?
The ecosystem.
The ecosystem. Because, and this is what I'm saying. I've dealt with a lot of work, in terms of decent work for cultural practitioners. Issues around, informality when it comes to independent contracts.
Yeah.
Issues of if a female artist gets pregnant, where does she go? Does she get Social Security Commission? Right? And all of that, from a labor perspective, only happens if there is a place and a point of engagement. So where are the musicians meeting? Because NASCAM is different in terms of they're collecting your money. That's your private right.
Yeah.
Right? But as an artist, you're adding contribution to society. So what's your public right that you're exercising? And that requires for the industries, the subsectors, to be organized.
Yes, yes. Maybe even unionized. But
maybe even unionized. But whether it is or not, and let's talk about the effectiveness of it and how it translates into what you're saying, into tangible benefits, material benefits. Any person that takes their career seriously, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a construction worker, whether you're a doctor, at some point somebody must represent those rights, those interests. Why are our creatives and our talent not organized to say, as musicians, this is our minimum rate for emerging artists? This is that's what we need in terms of professional associations. So if you look at engineering, you can go to NAST and get an engineering degree, but there's a professional association in accounting, in law, that sets the standard.
Yes.
So who sets the standard in this organization when we're talking about the Film Association? And now we can even applaud the film Filmmakers Association of Namibia, because you can see a lot of legwork that has been done under the current leadership. And that's the type of effort that's required. Collective bargaining. How do you come together as an industry to say, okay, in the next 5 years, we want to have a target of 10 features, 5 shorts, because all of that in the back end has an economic value. So, during COVID, I was involved in a movie project that was done from a film production, and the people were spending about 80 million in about 2-3 weeks, right? Dropping $1 million every day on transport, accommodation, and catering. That's indirect cost. Who's benefiting from that? So I think part of what's being missed here is telling stories is a massive economy.
Yes.
You know, even if we speak about issues around animation, if you zoom in on that, these are billions of dollars. And I think the problem is it takes too long to convince the people. And by the time, you know, even in Namibia, you go say, no, we're pioneering. They'll say, no, where else has it been done before? You know,
Yeah.
we're estranged from taking the lead in what you're saying, telling our stories, in investing in our stories, in making sure that over a 10-year period we're able to get the returns on investment on our stories. Like, we should not treat the creative industries like a plaque book. You know, and that's kind of the challenge a lot of the times, right? But you guys are watching Netflix,
Yeah.
but and then you take that serious.
Yeah.
You're investing in Showmax. You're taking that serious. But then when you're talking about our industry, the challenge is when it comes to distribution, we need a slate. We need a volume of output, and that's what distributors want. Distributors want to say, okay, Namibia, we're producing 50 films, and then as a result, all of us win.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick Sam, and thank you very much for joining us for this edition of the Evening Review. Tomorrow we do it again, so please join us again. Till then, good night.